Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is the end of the month, so it is time for my usual February wrap-up. So here I am to talk about everything I read in the month. I ended up sort of doing a repeat of last month in that I only read 5 books this month, but let's just go through what I did. So the first book that I read in February was actually a romance novel. It was called Unveiled by Courtney Milan. I don't actually talk about romance novels very much on this channel because I don't really read them that often, but sometimes they're really, really good, and Courtney Milan is one of those authors that is just really, really good. All of the novels that I've read of hers so far have been historical romances, so generally set about mid-1800s or so, and there's no fantasy elements or anything like that. It's just about, you know, people in the sort of upper realms of society in the mid-1800s. There are so many of these that on the surface look pretty similar, but the reason that I generally read Courtney Milan's books as opposed to other authors is the care that she takes with the setting and with the class system and with the characters that she has. Because she manages to, even though she's writing about like rich white people in the mid-1800s, do a romance that is set in history without romanticizing the history that much, if that makes any sense, because I find that a lot of people, when they're writing romance novels of that time period, tend to just kind of gloss over some of the less savory aspects of history because it's not really in the service of the story, because the service of the story is to just make you care about the romance between these two people. But I often find that that kind of does a disservice because it means that your setting ends up being kind of disingenuous and therefore your characters end up being sort of disingenuous. So that's one of the things that I really like about Courtney Milan's novels, is that she takes a lot of care with the setting and the characters. So the basic idea for Unveiled came from when one of her romance novel writer friends sent her like a draft of a story to read and to critique, and Courtney Milan came back with this whole long screed about how this marriage that had happened between this main couple, the fact that their witnesses had come in like after the event had already started, therefore like they wouldn't have been like, it wouldn't have been a legitimate marriage because they didn't see the full ceremony, and so if this ever got found out, the marriage would be completely illegitimized, and won't someone think of the children? So you can see what I'm saying about her thinking a lot about the actual details about the setting. But basically, her idea of won't someone think of the children was the seed for Unveiled. So the basic plot is that there's this old duke who is, you know, not a very particularly nice person, and it is revealed when he is very near the end of his life that he actually had had a first wife already when he married the woman that everyone thinks of as the Duchess. So therefore, their marriage is now illegitimate and all of their children are bastards. And instead, the person that brought this to light is now set to inherit, who's like a very distant cousin. And the person that brought this to light, that it now stands to inherit, we find out has a sort of personal grudge or vendetta against the family because he came from poverty, he's had to sort of work his way up through trade, and it seems that he came to the Duke for help at one point and was brutally rebuffed and like thrown out to fend for himself. So the romance pairing becomes obvious very quickly, and it is very clearly going to be the very distant relative that is now set to become the Duke once the actual Duke that currently holds the title dies, and the now illegitimate daughter of the Duke that she thought that she was an heiress, but now all of her money and power is just gone. So Courtney Milan manages to write really lovely relationships between people, and she manages to make them, you know, meetings of equals, even though they don't necessarily come from the same social situation. The fact that they have very clearly defined personalities and strengths and weaknesses that complement each other in really nice and refreshing ways. So if you are in the mood for a romance novel, I highly recommend Courtney Milan's books in general, but I also really enjoyed Unveiled. This is the first in a series, and I haven't read the rest of the series, so I don't know exactly what's gonna happen with it, but it's one of those things where like each book has its own couple and own main character, but they all sort of vaguely tie into each other because they all sort of know each other. I haven't read the rest of the series, but I did really enjoy this first one. The next book that I got through this month is not going to be a huge surprise. It is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I got through this on audiobook, again, as I am doing an audiobook reread of the whole series. Turns out that, yep, I still have a lot of emotions about them, and Prisoner of Azkaban has now made me cry. So, good job! The next one is one that I can't really talk about a lot because it is not technically out yet. It is Tell the Wind and Fire by Sarah Reese Brennan. I got this through NetGalley, thank you so much. And I will be filming and putting up a full book review once the book is released, which will be April. The basic premise of Tell the Wind and Fire is that it is a retelling of Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. I didn't really know anything about Tale of Two Cities going into it. I don't think that you need to, because basically she is retelling the story in a more modern day, more urban fantasy kind of setting, and I will tell you all about it later. The next book that I finished in February is one that I am so pleased I can talk about. It is Passenger by Alexandra Bracken. I put up a full book review of this, which I will link down below, so obviously this is not going to be a huge surprise. I loved this book. It is very definitively the first in a series, but I thought that it was a fantastic start to a series. It is a time travel book, which I was a little hesitant about because time travel books are often gimmicky/bad. They're often just bad, but this one was really cool. It does the time travel in a new and interesting way where you can't get to anywhere from anywhere. It's more like a system of portals where like a portal in New York will link to a New York in 2015 will link to a portal in like Nassau in 1776, and so in order to get back to New York 2015 you have to get back to that specific portal of Nassau in 1776, but then there are other portals in 1776 that will link to different times and places, so you're able to sort of hop through these different regions. It was very cool, and the basic idea is that it's sort of a treasure hunt where the main girl, Etta, is tasked with tracking down this artifact that her mother stole from the head of this time-traveling family, because that's a thing that exists apparently, and so she is tasked with getting it back. So I thought that the different time periods were done really well in this book. You don't spend a lot of time in all of the various places that they go to, so I thought that it was really impressive that she manages to get a real sense of the time and place in all of these different places that they go to, and she manages to get a sense of the setting very, very quickly, and so I believed that they were in these different places. As opposed to just sort of using them as backdrops, they felt like real places and real times that they were going to. I thought that it was very respectful of the different cultures and time, places, and periods, and I thought that that was really refreshing. I also really liked the relationship between Etta and Nicholas and the way that it developed, the way that, he calls her pirate because it turns out that she's really fierce. Etta is this girl, from modern day New York. She's never had to fight, but as soon as it comes time to, she's like raring to go. And he is a mixed race man whose mother was a slave, and his home timeline is 1776-ish. He's had very few people in his life ever treat him with respect, and so the fact that Etta very deeply respects him and wants him as an equal partner rather than a servant is something that he's not really had a lot of experience with, and I just thought that their relationship and their regard for each other was really strong, and it felt like a true appreciation that they had of who the other person was. So the final book that I have to talk about is one that might come as a bit of a surprise because I've never talked about this series on this channel before. It is Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. I am putting a picture of the cover here instead of holding up the physical copy because I got this on actual physical disc audiobook form, but I got it from the library, so I actually had to return it already. This is the very first in the Percy Jackson and the Olympians, I think, is the overarching series title. There were 5 in the first series, and then there's another series of 5 that happens after that that's maybe called Heroes of Olympus? I don't remember, and I don't really care. So the reason I am reading these is because my best friend that does the podcast with me started to read them, and she was reading them for more school-related things, but ended up getting kind of sucked into them, and it turns out that after the first few, which are kind of rough, they end up getting really good. So I decided to go along this with her, knowing that the first book was not going to be that good, but oh man, it is kind of a mess. Like, I know that this was a book that was written for 12-year-olds, so maybe if I were 12 I wouldn't be noticing so much. Like, it has the skeletal structure of a decent idea. So the basic premise of the series is that Rick Riordan was reading to his son all of these different Greek myths because his son was dyslexic and had ADHD, and this was basically the only thing that he was interested in. And so they read basically every single myth that existed, and then Rick decided to start writing his own stories about like this modern day storyline of young half-god and half-human kids that are going on these different adventures, and so you can kind of tell that the first book was kind of just like a series of these stories that he cobbled together to make a full book, because the pacing is really weird, the stakes tend to vary dramatically, the characters are a little bit cut and paste, like they're not really that developed, and the plot is just kind of nonsense. But there are some bare bones of a really good idea, and there are some moments that are really cool, and so I am gonna keep reading the series, and I trust that they get better because my friend told me that they do. The general plot is that Percy Jackson is a young, supposedly normal kid going to boarding school. He's been constantly kicked out of all these different schools for various things like not having great academic achievements because he's dyslexic and has ADHD and has trouble focusing and also will like get into fights all the time. And then it turns out that he's half god and he gets sent to a summer camp for demigods, because that is a thing. And I found that actually kind of delightful, just that whole idea of there being a summer camp for children of gods. It kind of felt like reverse Harry Potter or like the video game Psychonauts. If you've never heard of this, it is about a summer camp for psychics, and the video game is delightful, but whatever. So it turns out that Zeus's thunderbolt has gone missing, and they suspect that Percy was the one that took it because he's the son of Poseidon, which is technically a spoiler, but it's really obvious really soon that he's the son of Poseidon. And they think that, like, in a rivalry between Poseidon and Zeus, he stole it, but he totally didn't, but now he has to go on this quest to figure out who did. Anyway, like I said, the plot is kind of nonsense, and the stakes tend to vary drastically from, like, chapter to chapter, but I can see how they'd be fun for, you know, younger children who maybe wouldn't notice some of the holes, and apparently he does genuinely improve in the later books and they become more enjoyable, so I am gonna keep going. So that is actually everything that I managed to get through in the month of February. I am a little bit behind on the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge, just a tiny bit. I used Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief for the category of book you got out of the library, I used Passenger for a New York Times bestseller, and I used Tell the Wind and Fire for a book that takes place during the summer. Unfortunately, of that shortlist that I had in my last month's wrap-up and February TBR, the only one I got through was Passenger, so the TBR for March is pretty much the same as it was in February. So the main one that I'm really definitely gonna try to get through is All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. I started this one this month, I just didn't finish it. I'm only a couple of chapters in, but I am finding it delightful, which is a thing that I had suspected would happen because she did a reading at the signing that I went to, and it was very funny, the excerpts that she was reading from, but I am really enjoying this one, and I've heard from basically everyone that's read it that they've really liked it, so this is like top of the list for March. And the other ones are ones that I've mentioned so many times, I'm not even really gonna bother recapping them. They are Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho, City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett, and The Trader Bar Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. These are ones that I've been saying I'm gonna read for like 3 months now. Let's see if I actually manage it this month. But that is actually gonna be it for my February wrap-up and March TBR. Let me know if you've read any of those books down in the comments below, what you thought of them, and I will see you guys very soon with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye!